Now, the International Court of Justice is expected to deliver judgment in the case between South Africa and Israel tomorrow. South Africa accuses Israel of violating the Genocide Convention and has requested the court for provisional measures against it. Senior researcher at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, joins us via video link to look at the international interest on this matter. Very good afternoon to you, Dr. Emmanuel, and thank you for your time on the SABC at this hour.
Good afternoon to you, your viewers, your listeners, and thank you for the kind invitation.
Dr. Emmanuel, let's look at the international interest in this case, just how big it is for South Africa and its standing in the international community.
Indeed, one can say actually that here what is on trial is not Israel and its actions over Palestine. What is on trial here is actually the Western handlers of Israel, such as the United States and the United Kingdom, that seem to have this unthinking, so to say, embrace of everything that Israel is doing. Unfortunately, the way Israel was offered all the excuses because of the recklessness that Hamas prosecuted on the 7th of October. But what South Africa is doing obviously has been largely welcomed, especially by countries and players of the developing world, such as the Organization of Islamic Countries, for example. We have countries such as Brazil, Bolivia, Turkey even has joined into this particular cause here. So it is not something that is seen as South Africa's single-handed pursuit of Israel. It is something that is seen as the developing world trying to rise up against Western outposts, so to say, and the massacre that Israel has been creating against Palestine, which is to a large extent taken as part of the developing world, so to say.
Well, as we backtrack a little bit and look at South Africa's history in response to similar incidences, whether it is genocide or even crimes against humanity, what also comes to the fore on that front?
You would remember, and most of the people would remember, that in April and May of 1994, just when South Africa was picking itself up from the morass of apartheid and Nelson Mandela assuming to the presidency, there was a lot of goodwill about South Africa. There was also a lot of goodwill about Africa in general. Bill Clinton even said what South Africa has done here could actually be transformed into international goodwill for Africa. But then in that same month of April is when the Rwandan genocide started as well. The contrast could not have been starker between hope on the southern part of the continent and obviously despair in Central Africa. And it is partly because of that post-apartheid South Africa is almost instinctively against the cannibalistic politics of the developing world here. And obviously South Africa, when it came to the Gambia against the Myanmar case, which was also taken to the International Court of Justice, also on allegations of genocide, South Africa was a little bit equivocal on that particular front there, because on the one hand, it is instinctively against genocide, but on the other hand, again, it was more reluctant, so to say, to lambast Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been seen as a good representative of the developing world. So that is just a mixed bag of where South Africa is coming from. But when it comes to criticism of players that are considered as players of the global south, you will see that South Africa will come to the defense of those who are judged to be the helpless.
We look at the responses from other states. Yesterday, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, expressing his thoughts on the matter, hoping that justice would follow the letter. What also comes to the fore, given the responses by some of the other states at this point?
Thank you. We can look at just a few examples. You have already mentioned Russia's stance. I'll not belabor that. An interesting one was from Belgium. It has taken, so to say, an independent view from the European Union by saying it will respect whatever ruling the International Court of Justice will establish tomorrow. So that is an interesting position by Belgium, a position that is open to what the ruling will be. And that is, to some extent, respect for the United Nations, because the International Court of Justice is an instrument of the United Nations. It is separate from the International Criminal Court. We should not forget that. Secondly, if we look at the United States has been Israel's staunchest backer right from the time that the Israeli state was established in 1947. It is thus not very surprising that 210 members of the United States Congress have written to Antony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State in the United States, to lambast South Africa for what they call gross distortions. The language that the Republic of Israel used, by the way, of the gross distortions of what they say South Africa's case is composed of. So that was expected, so to say, and it might tinker a little bit with the relationship that South Africa will have with the United States. The developing world have already alluded to the fact that it is largely in support of what South Africa is doing, but the United States position is not surprising at all. It will always, almost by instinct, take Israel's line.
Dr. Emmanuel, I want to wrap up just very quickly, and you alluded to this. I want to then look at South Africa's relations with countries opposed to the case or remained mum at this point, the US, the UK, and whether this could be problematic later for South Africa. But also, secondly, when we look at the reputation of the ICJ, its relevance, even the recourse for the victims and South Africa at large, what do you observe on that front? Help us understand those 2 points.
I will start with the second point that you mentioned there. I think if you look at the International Court of Justice, it is an important component of the United Nations, although we should be clear about one thing. It does not have the power to enforce its judgment. So it can pass its judgments, but then the power to enforce the judgment will be devolved to the United Nations, with members of the Security Council having veto power over that. So that is one element of this particular case. What we expect tomorrow is that the International Court of Justice will rule on some of the temporary measures, such as the immediate seizure of Israel's activities in Palestine. It might not rule on whether or not Israel is committing genocide. That will actually will probably take a couple of years for it to be resolved. So the court is important. It is an important instrument of the United Nations. It is binding on all United Nations members, but then it cannot enforce its judgment. So that is where its parameters kind of end. Now, to talk about the first segment of your question there about South Africa's standing, and especially with respect to individual countries, especially those that are opposed to South Africa's case against Israel here. Again, I will look at the United States being the most prominent of these opponents of South Africa's case. I will take you a little bit back on that one as well, to what Democrat Chris Coons, who is an important and quite influential senator, has said in the United States. Last year, he already started saying that South Africa should be removed from the beneficiaries of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, called AGOA, which is due for renewal in 2025. And this year, by the way, it will be voted upon in the House of Congress. The reasons that Chris Coons gave was that, first of all, South Africa is not a relatively poor country compared to other African countries. Secondly, he reviewed or regretted what he thought was South Africa's defense of Russia. What South Africa is doing at the moment by taking Israel to the ICJ will only add flame to that particular fire, and it will ginger up a lot of members of the American Congress, especially those who are of the Republican Party, because of the 210 members of Congress that have enjoined Antony Blinken to write against South Africa. A lot of them are coming from the Republican Party. So yes, it is quite important to look at what the United States is going to do on this particular matter, whether or not South Africa, based on this fact, will be ejected from AGOA. And obviously, not far from our side should be the outcome of what will happen in November. Will we have a Democrat in the United States White House? Will we have a Republican? That will also impinge on whether or not South Africa will continue to enjoy the respect that it has historically enjoyed in the eyes of the United States.
Thank you very much for your time at this hour and for weighing in. We're going to leave the conversation there for now. Dr. Emmanuel Matambo from the Senior Research at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, weighing in on the international interest in the SA-Israel ICJ case. Of course, the implications for South Africa and really where to from here. The world waiting with bated breath. We'll continue to monitor developments as it unfolds. We're set to hear your ruling tomorrow.